Hello, and welcome to Pollinator Partnership's Monarch Habitat Management and Technical Training webinar series. This series is an extension of the Monarch Wings Across Eastern Broadleaf Forest program and is made possible with the support of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and in partnership with multiple agencies and organizations. I'm your host, Elizabeth Kaufman, and I'm excited to welcome Iris Caldwell, whose presentation will cover the importance of creating and managing habitat within rights-of-ways. Iris is the program manager of the Sustainable Landscapes at the Energy Resources Center at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She facilitates the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group, the Illinois Monarch Project, and other efforts to engage industries in pollinator habitat conservation. Prior to joining the ERC, Iris worked for more than 8 years in environmental engineering, sustainability reporting, and climate change mitigation. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Environmental Engineering from the Iowa State University. Thank you so much for joining us today, Iris.
Good morning. Yes, and thanks for having me here. So yes, as Elizabeth said, I'm going to be talking about work that we've been doing here at the University of Illinois Chicago for the last 4 years to work with energy and transportation companies and organizations to promote habitat, primarily pollinator habitat, certainly monarch habitat on these types of energy and transportation lands. We have a strong focus on looking at rights-of-way and the role that they can provide in terms of connecting habitat in different favorable landscapes, but also look at other energy and transportation lands that are suitable for habitat opportunities. So let me start with, again, just kind of painting the picture. As I think you've seen through this webinar series, there is a strong interest in finding ways to engage different sectors in habitat conservation. And a paper written back in 2017 really highlighted the significance of this multi-sector, multi-landscape type of conservation strategy, particularly when looking at monarch conservation. And so you'll oftentimes hear the terminology all hands on deck, recognizing that in order for us to really have successful, beneficial habitat conservation at the scale we need to for monarchs and other pollinators, we really need to engage across different landscape types to find opportunities for habitat restoration, address threats that each sector has, and again, look for opportunities for these kind of cross-sector collaboratives. And so, again, there's plenty of opportunities within each of these sectors, but the work that we've been doing here within the Energy Resources Center has been really heavily focused on the rights-of-way sector. So looking at utility companies, electric, gas, oil, solar, as well as departments of transportation, railroads, and how those types of lands can really provide a benefit for pollinators. So when we think about rights-of-way, again, this is the land that's under electric corridors, it's above pipelines, it's along the roads and railroads that we see and pass by every day. And many of us pass by these lands without much thought. They're there. We recognize that they're kind of a necessary part of our modern world. And it's certainly, I think, is a shift in mindset to think about these lands as potential habitat opportunities. But when we really start to look and see, what the potential opportunity is out there, we look at the extensive network of highways that we have that crisscross the country. We have, I believe this is railroad. Sorry, my camera was covering my screen. We have electric transmission lines and pipelines. We paint this picture of a very diverse landscape. Certainly, essentially these rights-of-way extend to every developed part of our country. They crisscross a variety of different landscapes, and in doing so, create this really neat network and kind of map of connectivity corridors that really provide a unique habitat conservation value. So when we look at rights-of-way in this way, again, as I said, there's an extensive network, there's these linear connectors, they're intersecting a variety of landscapes. They oftentimes create and provide greater plant diversity than many of the adjacent lands that they're running alongside. They're generally free of major disturbances. We don't have the worry of urban sprawl or development that will eliminate a right-of-way. It serves a fundamental operational purpose. They're protected, as I said, from future development. And then there's research studies that are increasingly showing that these types of right-of-way habitats, stepping stones, so to speak, can be really beneficial for species such as insect pollinators. And so again, this has been a focus of research and work that we've been doing here at the University of Illinois Chicago. And as we work with these organizations, we also recognize that rights-of-way are really just one piece, right? They provide this unique connectivity, but there's a variety of other lands, be it the rest areas or generation sites or solar development sites that are associated with rights-of-way that also provide an opportunity for habitat. So when we started these conversations, again, about 4 years ago, there was a lot of enthusiasm, first off, which was exciting to see. A lot of folks across the energy and transportation sectors that I think have recognized for decades that there's an opportunity for these lands to provide a valuable habitat. But there's a lot of operational questions about how will this work? Does managing for habitat on a right-of-way cost more? How do you know that you have habitat? How do you measure it? How do you reach the decision makers if they're within your organization or public stakeholders that may have a role in influencing the success of these types of projects? What are others doing? What's successful? What lessons can we learn? What pitfalls do we want to avoid? And then there's a whole concern as well in this industry, being heavily regulated, about what impact creating habitat on these types of lands will provide or create in terms of a regulatory standpoint. So how can they ensure that they are meeting their regulatory requirements from an operational standpoint, but also not creating additional regulatory burden by, again, doing habitat conservation. So all of these questions really created a unique opportunity for us to create a collaborative that provides a forum for stakeholders from across the energy and transportation sectors, plus interested stakeholders from the government sector, the nonprofit sector, the academic sector, to come together and find creative, collaborative solutions to promote habitat on these types of landscapes. And so this has been the evolution of the Rights-of-Way as Habitat Working Group as really this central meeting place for organizations to come together, have these conversations, find best management practices and ways, strategies to do habitat better on energy and transportation lands. The working group, again, is a very unique collaborative in that sense, that it brings together organizations from across the US and Canada. We have more than 200 organizations that are involved in the working group, and very uniquely are coming from a variety of different sectors. Again, we have utilities, roads and highways, railroads, and then academia, government, and nonprofit. And really, again, creates a neat forum to have some really innovative discussions about habitat. So this, again, kind of the foundation to have these conversations, of course, is coming from understanding how rights-of-way are managed. So as long as there have been roads and rail and electric and pipelines, essentially the infrastructure that keeps our modern world working, there has been a need to maintain that infrastructure and the lands above or surrounding that infrastructure in a way that supports its safe and efficient operation. And what we've seen is that vegetation management has changed over time. We've moved away from really extensive mechanical clearing and mowing. Herbicide use has historically been used, And we're seeing a shift towards what we call integrated vegetation management, which is a way at looking at different mechanisms and methods of managing vegetation, be it chemical, mechanical, cultural, or biological, and finding the ways to kind of do that vegetation management in a more sustainable way, in a way that minimizes impacts and efforts, and also can be more cost effective. And ultimately, the goal in many of these locations, be it a roadside or an electric utility corridor, is to find low-growing vegetation that won't interfere with the infrastructure directly, ensures the safe operation of that infrastructure, as well as as needed access to the infrastructure for maintenance or modernization. And what's especially, I think, important for us to point out is that these goals in many ways align very well with the goals of creating and establishing pollinator habitat. So that same low-growing vegetation, particularly if flowering and native, can be really valuable habitat for pollinators. The other real consideration is thinking about the impacts of at-risk species, and in particular, endangered or threatened species. And from the perspective of an organization that's operating electric utility line or a road, endangered species tend to complicate operations and add costs. There's additional restrictions that are put in place that may slow down construction and maintenance activities. There's certain processes and permitting that must take place. And again, I think there's an understandable perception that having endangered species on your property certainly doesn't make things easier. And so I think when we've been having these discussions about pollinator habitat and understanding how rights of way can support pollinators, and particularly species like the monarch that may be listed as threatened or endangered, the question we oftentimes get is, well, why would we promote habitat for a species that may complicate our operations? Are we effectively shooting ourselves in the foot if we do that? And so the question and the challenge that we have as a working group is to find ways that we can conserve monarchs, that we can support pollinator habitat, particularly for species who really desperately need that type of support, while at the same time maintaining that same operational flexibility that these companies and organizations need in order to maintain their infrastructure and keep safety and efficiency of operations in mind as well. So one of our key projects as a working group has been to develop the first nationwide candidate conservation agreement with assurances, known as a CCAA. And this is essentially a voluntary conservation agreement that provides a mechanism to incentivize voluntary conservation. In this case, we're focused on energy and transportation lands. And in doing so, by providing a mechanism for organizations to voluntarily commit to conservation actions, they in turn receive assurances that if the monarch butterfly is to become listed as either threatened or endangered, then they have certain protections for incidental take or other impacts. And so again, this provides a really innovative mechanism to both incentivize that conservation work on the ground while also provide that operational flexibility that many of these companies desire. So this project to create a CCAA for the monarch butterfly, we've been working on for the past year and a half. We have more than 45 partners at this point who've been intimately involved in the development of the agreement. And through this agreement, we envision creating more than 2 million acres of habitat on energy and transportation land. It's an unprecedented level of collaboration. We've not seen an agreement, CCAA, of this scale or geographic representation. And it's also been completed on one of the fastest timelines ever seen. There are a number of, again, really unique benefits about this type of agreement. Again, it provides a mechanism to demonstrate and assure that operational flexibility. It provides a mechanism for industry to step up and show that they have a role to play in meeting these conservation needs. By working together across energy and transportation sectors, we've been able to reduce redundancy of effort and cost in developing this conservation agreement. We've also been able to address the concern that the Fish and Wildlife Service had about the capacity to be able to administer or even support the development of either multiple agreements or an agreement of this size and scale. So this particular agreement is established as a programmatic CCAA, meaning that the University of Illinois Chicago will be effectively administering the program on behalf of the service. And then it provides, again, this really unique partnership value that I think we've seen throughout the development process has definitely provided significant value and opportunities for all the parties involved, be it the Fish and Wildlife Service as well as the industry organizations that are represented. So there are a number of key conservation measures that are identified both in the CCAA, but that we also identify as best management practices or opportunities to create habitat on rights of way. The first is to use native species wherever possible through seeding or planting, milkweed, and native flowering plants, really enhancing the diversity of those types of flowering species across the landscape. In some cases, just simply changing management practices helps to enhance that diversity in the native seed bank. But in some cases, it's also helpful or necessary to do some additional seeding. Adjusting the timing of different management practices. So the timing of mowing or brush removal or pesticide applications, limiting those types of activities to times when monarchs or their larvae or eggs are not present, or during kind of lower times in the season is an opportunity to reduce impacts to those species, not just monarchs, but other pollinators. Generally reducing the frequency of mowing and spraying, using targeted practices where possible, instead of a broadcast spray or a complete mow, simply doing strips or minimizing the area that's impacted in a particular path is also helpful. Implementing management practices that, as I mentioned, through integrated vegetation management, there's mechanical and chemical practices, but there's a whole variety of other biological and cultural controls, such as prescribed burning or grazing, or other management practices that can really promote beneficial plants in the landscape. And then lastly, looking for opportunities where possible to simply set aside lands that don't need to be actively managed. So here in the picture, you can see an area that's been set aside as a generation facility. Again, it's not an area that needs to be heavily managed, and certainly we've seen across the energy and transportation sectors, be it at a generation site or a rest area or a corporate office. And there's plenty of opportunities to find these types of set-aside areas that can convert turf grass or otherwise unfavorable type landscapes into something that can be really valuable and kind of be an oasis, so to speak, for pollinators. And I think what's important to consider as we look at these types of opportunities and these types of management practices is that no one's asking a company or an organization or a landowner to simply convert their entire lands that they manage to habitat. What's really important is that we create a series of stepping stones, so to speak, or small patches of habitat across the landscape that, again, provide resources sometimes where they're desperately needed. So Here's just a collage of examples of what stepping stones might look like. Here's an example of, again, just a segment of the right-of-way. You can see there's a mown safety zone right next to the road, but here's an instance of what habitat along a roadside could look like. Here's one of those set-aside areas. Again, it's a distinct habitat patch, but in this case, size doesn't matter, and it really provides a lot of valuable resources. Here's a right-of-way under an electric line. Here's a field edge. Here's another type of habitat set aside, working with partner programs like Pheasants Forever. This is an instance of a garden in a planter, sidewalk planter here on our campus at University of Illinois, Chicago. So again, the patches can be small and still impactful. Here's a photo from a solar array and utilizing the vegetation around the arrays themselves to create habitat. We saw this picture on the other slide, but again, set aside areas and generation sites. And then this is one of my favorite photos. This is from downtown Chicago in a sidewalk planter. You can see this caterpillar has found what it needs here. So the other things, I'm kind of wrapping up my points here, are, again, looking for opportunities to really, again, shift the way that we look at rights-of-way. In many cases, either the public, I think, for the most part, has kind of ignored rights-of-way, right? They're kind of just there. We don't think much about them. Oftentimes, the companies themselves, be it a Department of Transportation or electric utility, haven't really considered the rights-of-way as the asset that they can be. You know, really, this is an opportunity to increase the value of your land, you know, through ecological restoration, certainly improving landowner cooperation and public relations. There's really an opportunity to look at our rights-of-way differently than we historically have. There's an opportunity to really build these types of practices into our sustainability strategy. You know, looking at vegetation management as a sustainability opportunity, you know, to manage vegetation in a way that really promotes ecosystem services, reduces potentially chemical use, greenhouse gas emissions. There's a number of opportunities to look at vegetation management programs and find ways to incorporate them into sustainability measures. And then certainly there's, you know, the partnership opportunities that seem endless when we're looking at these types of projects. So rights-of-way, energy transportation lands present a really unique opportunity to partner with the local communities, local leaders, nonprofits. There's a whole slew of very eager partners that are interested in working with energy and transportation companies to support these types of projects. I want to also highlight additional resources that are available. Again, I've spoken at a pretty high level today about the opportunities for rights-of-way. We do manage a website for the Rights-of-Way Habitat Working Group, and on this website you can find a whole library of resources. We have best management practices, case studies, tools, other resources, webinar recordings that we've done, all available at your fingertips. And we also have a segment of the website for our working group, and we encourage you to join this working group and the conversations that we're having. We have working group directories. You can connect with other energy and transportation stakeholders from across the country, as well as nonprofits and academics and other experts. We have proceedings from our past meetings, including copies of presentations, webinar recordings, and so forth. We have a segment of our working group access page that has information on task forces. So, you know, what our different projects are besides the CCAA. We have a couple of exciting efforts to develop a pollinator habitat scorecard, a geospatial database. So a number of exciting efforts, again, finding ways to promote habitat on these types of lands. And then lastly, we have a discussion board that provides an opportunity, again, to have some of these conversations outside of the meeting format. So we have a variety of different topics you can subscribe to, be it native seeding or cost-benefit analyses or PR communications, all kind of related to how can we better promote habitat on energy and transportation land. So I encourage you to tap into that discussion board and join some of the conversations that are happening there. So with that, here is my contact information, as well as the website address as well, and encourage you to reach out to me if you have any additional questions or would like to learn more information.
Thank you, Iris, for sharing such critically important information. And thank you all for your interest. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation as well. For additional information and to access downloadable materials regarding monarch habitat creation, including eco-regional planting guides, habitat manuals, and additional webinars, please visit us at pollinator.org, where you can find these materials and more housed under the Resources tab. Thank you all again so much.